Hello and welcome to my all new podcast. My name's Neil Hodgson. I'm an ex British and World Superbike champion. I've teamed up with Ducati UK to bring you the Ducati Diaries. The plan is, over the next few months, is to use our contacts and hopefully get some really good guests. When I was first asked to do this a while back, the very first person I thought of who would be an amazing guest is the guy we've got on. Now I'm talking biking royalty, an absolute legend, the one and only Casey Stoner. Casey, thanks for joining us, mate.
Not a problem, mate. Always time for you.
What's it feel like? It's funny, I know, and this might sound like a start with a strange question, but like when people say an absolute biking legend, is that like, yeah, that's me, that's a norm? Like genuinely, how do you feel about that?
I actually think it's taken a long time for any of those kind of words to, for me to just even be okay with it. Because the one thing about my whole career is I sort of never thought I was good enough, never thought I was going to get as far as I did. In my early years, I was confident, but then reality kicked in and it sort of made things a lot harder. So that whole time I was racing, even shortly after racing, there's no way I would ever consider myself that. And even to this day, there's no way I would ever truly believe that. But it is, I have a lot of pride in my career and what I achieved. And, we achieved a lot more than others could. And so I think there's a lot of pride in that, being able to, um, accept that a little bit more now. And certainly, like I said, be proud of the career we had.
Isn't it funny? I think it's such a motorcycle racer's mentality is that you focus on the negatives. You're always trying to achieve something and it's never quite good enough. And I know that that's exactly what you were like, but and that almost backs up your answer to you look at what you've achieved, but look what you didn't achieve because you wanted to achieve more. It's funny, but I look at you as someone who's achieved something that I wanted to achieve. So it's almost like it's not jealousy, but it's an envy. I look and think, God, imagine walking around being Casey Stoner. Like genuinely, I that's how I feel. But then there's people that race in British Championships and look at me and think, wow, imagine being Neil Hodgson. Like what a career he's got. So it's just funny that you weirdly can focus on the negatives, isn't it? And it's weird that.
It's all relativity in the position you're in, and we all strive to be better, and especially the people who really don't strive to be better often find a neutral gear, and they sort of plateau a little bit and don't go any further. But if they're content with what they've got, but if you're never content with what you've got, then you always strive for more, and not just out of greed, out of the want to be better, the want to improve yourself in every aspect. So it doesn't even need to be about motorcycle racing and what we were good at to want to be better at something as well. So I think it's a nice attitude to have to have a little bit more humbleness, I suppose, in the position you're in. Always believing there was a lot more to get, rather than thinking, yeah, I was damn good at this, and I don't think you could be much better. There was always more to get out of yourself, and the machine, whatever it is, there's certainly always more to get.
Yeah. It's funny then I was just smiling, thinking most motorcycle races are like that, and some weren't. Some were that they'd walk around, they've won nothing, and they're walking around like they own the place. Thankfully, you weren't like that, and I wasn't like that, so that's good. The good news for you is, look at this pad here. I've got some questions for you.
That's only a
Now
couple
I
of
know
pages.
I know you pretty well, Casey. Obviously, I've known you for a lot of years, but there's loads of bits that I don't know, and I know that you started in dirt track. You were incredibly successful, but I don't know how you got into dirt track. I don't know if that was a family thing. Tell me, like, what first attracted you to riding bikes?
To be honest, I don't know if I was allowed to have any other attraction. To be honest, I think it was, you're going to be a bike rider from when I was very, very young age, and I'm not only one to think that. I think my parents have stated that enough times to certain people, and I was sort of pushed in that direction. My elder sister, who's 6.5 years older than me, she actually raced a little bit of dirt bikes and dirt track before I was born, and when I was very young. So it was sort of a natural progression to go and do a little bit more of that. And I think because at the time road racing was a lot more similar to dirt track, that was our sort of way in. There was no mini moto in Australia. There was no junior road racing program. So as close as we could get to anything to do with the road, was through dirt track. I started racing at 4, 5. You can start road racing at 14, 15, but that was a long way away, and Europe was always way ahead of us on that part. So doing dirt track was as close as we could get to running corner speed, finding traction, finding grip, and it was the best stepping stone for us to go to road racing.
And did you realize at the time that you were what's not the word groomed is not the word, but well, yeah, you were being groomed to be a professional motorcycle racer, or obviously that's your only one reference point. That was the norm. Did that just feel norm, or did you think actually this feels a bit intense? Or how did you feel about it?
I think it's hard. It's not until I sort of reached my mid-teens where I started to have a bit of a reality check on what I was actually doing. Before then, I was competitive. I'm not as competitive as people think. I'm a lot more competitive internally rather than externally versus other people. I always challenge myself to things. So all those younger years was just getting the job done that I was expected to do. I enjoyed winning. I loved it, but I enjoyed perfect laps, perfect races, as close as I could get to that. And from a young age, I always sort of challenged myself constantly to be better. So I didn't just win races; I tried to win them. If I won race by 5 seconds in a 4 lap race, I'd try and win. I'd try and get to double that by the end of the day if I could. So that always kept me sharp, and it stopped me from being sort of complacent in the position that I was at. And it wasn't until sort of 16, 17, 18 that reality kicked in. I'd had a couple of years road racing in the UK and Spain, been rather successful, and then you get to world championships, and maybe an engineer that wasn't sort of didn't have your best interests at heart, and very nearly finished my career right there after my first year of world championships, just because of the reality of how hard it was in comparison to everything else I'd experienced up to that point. And it was a real reality check for me, and I think it was then that I started to consider everything around me and consider how and why I got to the position that I was in. And that's when the mind started to change a little bit, and realized that really was being groomed my whole life just to sort of be here and be put on a track and try and win. And that was my seemingly most of my existence.
So how old was you then when you moved to England?
I was 14 when I went to the UK.
And
Just
who
14.
made that decision? What was that like? Do you sit down as a family and go, listen, you've you've reached the limit here in Australia. We need to go to Europe. Is that how it went?
No, a very, very different story to that. We'd pretty much reached the limit in dirt track. I was challenged year to year by different people. A couple of young racers in Australia were very, very competitive, and I still think they would have been incredibly successful overseas had their careers taken a different direction. But it was also generally the fathers putting a lot of pressure and forcing a lot of things that they really struggle with, and I think that's why a lot of them weren't able to be a little bit more successful and sort of follow the path overseas. For me, it was there was a new category that had just opened up in Australia. Normally, the minimum age to go into road racing, you had to be a senior, which was at 16 years old. Then you could start to ride a 125 or a 250 production bike, etc. And we had a new category come in at 14 for a Moriwaki GP80, and we were planning on doing that. So we got all our license done, and we had everything ready to go road racing. Most of my competitors were sort of 6 months to 12 months older than me, so they'd already been in the class racing for a little while. And unfortunately, one of the things you had to have to race in that category was to join a club, and there was only one club in existence in Australia, and it was run by parents of riders that I'd raced my whole career, and they didn't want me racing, so they just refused my application, and basically it was go overseas, which we had lots of options in terms not options, but we had maybe going to Indonesia and running underbone racing or something like that over in Malaysia. And through my father's right of abode, through my grandparents, we had the chance to go to the UK and do the Aprilia Challenge, and that's where we decided to go. So it was, yeah, it was a tough call for sure. Um, but it was either spend another 2 years doing dirt track in Australia or get overseas and try to make the most of it while we could. So it was our hand was forced more than a decision made.
And I've never asked you this before, but did you want to?
Um, I think I'd been convinced of a dream, I suppose. Yes, I loved riding bikes and, I really did enjoy racing. But there was lots of other things that I really enjoyed as well, but just never had the opportunity and never was allowed to do anything else. So, motorbikes for our budget, everything. Fortunately, dirt track was probably the cheapest way that you could go motorbike racing. You could survive on very, very little in dirt track and show your potential through other ways. Yes, having good bikes and good tires and all that sort of thing made a difference, but it wasn't the be all end all. You could always make a difference in other ways. So I think it was the best thing we could have done racing through that. Like I said, I enjoyed it. It wasn't until late teens, early 20s where I sort of was like, I don't know if I would have been a bike racer had I've actually had a choice. Um, but at the same time, I felt that no matter what I would have done, I sort of have my mentality of self punishment, of never being good enough that always drove me to try and be better in any single thing that I did. I didn't like it when I wasn't not perfect. I don't believe in the word perfect, but I really didn't enjoy when I wasn't, you know, in my own terms, considered a good enough level at anything I did. So I would always sort of try to get up as high as I could, regardless of what sport.
God, what a line, eh? Self punishment. I know that feeling. It's so funny, and I'm sure this happens to you all the time wherever you go. I bet you miss racing. Hey, tell me, how much do you miss racing? Do you miss it? Do you miss it, Casey? I get it all the time, and I always answer with the exact same. I'll look at the person and go, "Not one bit," and they're always shocked because they always go, "Really?" And I go, "No, not at all." And I genuinely don't think people understand, and I get why they don't understand because I always say you don't understand because this is your hobby, this is something you enjoy. But when it's what you do for a living, the self punishment, the self loathing that you have, especially when you go to bed at night, when you're on your own and it's quiet, wow. And after years of that, there is nothing quite like it, is there? As in, it's you're torturing yourself because you've underperformed, you haven't achieved, you've let everybody down. But more importantly, you've let yourself down. That's what you're talking about, isn't it? It's that, but that's what drives you forward. So you get up the next day and you're like, I am not. That is not happening to me again. Is that exactly what you went through? That sort of thing.
I Like I said, we're talking about um, being so hard on ourselves. There was definitely moments after races that I would sit and really feel a lot of guilt for not getting the job done or making a mistake, things like that. Then the guilt would really set in. When I was actually out on track and doing what I had to, it was all internal. I never thought about anyone else. I never thought about I have to get this done or I have to get this result, otherwise my career's over, kind of thing. I would just go out and do what I had to do. And I learned a lot more, and as my years went on, and right up until my last year, I was probably only getting close to where I thought I knew I had a lot more under control mentally. But yeah, I never sort of had too many outside effects while I was on the bike. It wasn't until after I made my mistake and it was that evening or whatever that it would start, the guilt would start to set in of everybody at the track doing everything they could to get you to that point, and then you go and launch it. Especially early in a race was very painful for me. But out on track, it was always just an internal battle of I suppose trying not to expect too much from yourself, but at the same time, it's what kept me driving forward. If I didn't have that, then it would have been savage. So it was always, more the internal battles than worrying about anybody else's thoughts outside, trying to get to those moments.
Yeah, if you didn't have that, we wouldn't be talking now. So, fact, you probably, yeah, you shouldn't have had it, so you wouldn't have had to listen to me rabbiting on. Um, the beautiful thing is, you are aware that you remember you bought a bike off my dad. Can you remember that?
Yep.
How funny is that? Eh? I think I told you this last year, but my mum, unfortunately, she passed away 5 years ago. But she absolutely loved you. And the funny thing is, listen to this. It's embarrassing, but it's true. My mum's claim to fame was Casey Stoner had sat on the grass in her garden, and you was drinking some orange juice. So when you came, I'm assuming you came with your dad to buy the bike. I'm sure my dad was talking your dad's ear off because my dad can talk. And you sat and had a glass of orange or whatever it was, and that's my mum's claim to fame. Not that a son won a world championship. It's that Casey Stoner had been there. So
Out on the grass out the front.
yeah, unreal. And so you'd have been 15 then, I guess, 14, 15.
Yeah, it would have been for the 125. Yeah, probably still 14.
Yeah,
I was that was in 2000,
yeah.
and then I started racing 125s at the end of that year. So October I turned 15, so I would have been 14, 15.
And I said, I've told this story before, and you know which story I'm going to tell. It's so funny because in the year 2000, I was racing British Superbikes, and this genuinely happened. It was so funny. There's a knock on the door, and I think it was like one of the early rounds. You were racing super teams, weren't you?
Yeah,
Yeah. Knock on the door,
I don't know
genuinely.
if it was even a test date. No, I think it might have been a race. I think it was
Yeah.
Cadwell, but I can't
Yeah.
even properly
No,
remember.
you came at Cadwell again, but you'd come before. It could have been somewhere like Thruxton or somewhere like that. So there's a knock on the door. I open the door. It's Casey Stoner. Obviously, I don't know him. He's 14 years old. At the time, I'm like 26 and I'm racing BSB. So I look down and go, "Hi, you all right?" And he says, "I'm Casey Stoner. I'm Australian. I'm racing in the super teams. I wondered if you could come and watch me. I'm just like looking for some pointers, some help and advice. Like genuinely, you were really nice and polite, like unbelievably polite."
Back when I
And I
used to be
thought,
nice.
and do you know what I thought? I thought, fair play. That's gutsy. He's come round to my motorhome. This young Aussie kid. Fair play. Anyway, I walked back in and thought, well, I'm busy. I'm not going to go and watch you. Anyway, it was either the next round or 2 rounds later, knock on the door. Pff, here you are again. Dead polite in your team gear. Hi, did you get a chance to watch me? And I'm like, oh no, sorry, I was busy. And I thought, oh God, I'm going to end up having to watch him. So anyway, it was one of them. I actually said to my wife at the time, look, if he comes knocking on the door again, will you answer? Because I feel a bit embarrassed. Anyway, it was Cadwell that you came. So Cadwell, you knocked on the door, like practice. Oh, have you had a chance to come and watch me? So at this point, I thought I am definitely going to go and watch you. So I jumped on a scooter, went out to Park, which is at the end of the back straight, and I'm there on my own. I'm a little yellow scooter, watching the super teams come round, and I watch you get to the end of the straight, round Park, round the next. It might be called Chris Curve, really fast, and I genuinely couldn't believe what I was seeing. How fast you were! You pulled away from everyone, you destroyed everyone, and there were some good riders in the field then. And I remember coming back and telling my wife at the time, going, "Oh my God, that Aussie kid's like so fast. How funny that that's like the first time we met. It's like bizarre. Can,
I
can,
can't
can you
believe I
remember
had.
that?"
Yeah, I still remember turning up at your door for. I still don't really know why. I can't remember details or anything like you can, but yeah, I apologize.
It was funny.
That's when I was friendly and probably tried to talk your ear off, but no, I remember the first like race of the season. I'd never seen just about road racing. I don't think I'd ever been to a track road racing. Maybe '95 watching Mick and things like that around Eastern Creek, but you couldn't barely see the place. I was only 10, and then watching you guys on superbikes was just phenomenal. And you and Chris Walker's fights and battles and everything was unreal. So yeah, obviously had a little bit more minerals than I thought I did. And, I probably just assumed, if you're like a kid, you've got plenty of time to go and watch everybody else like we do. But no, you get into the bigger categories, you realize that your day's pretty full.
It's funny because I know you say, and I've heard you say this before, that you're quite introvert, but you wasn't then at all. You were pretty
No,
extrovert,
I've
really.
become introvert. I used to be outside all the time, and I'd be happy to make friends and do things like that. I still struggled a little bit, especially in larger groups. I really was never ever comfortable. Um, but no, I think MotoGP in particular turned me into an introvert. And when you start getting called all sorts of crap and having all sorts of pressure on you, it was kind of like, well, I just want to go and wrap up in my little cocoon now. So it took its toll on me pretty early, to be honest. And I went from someone that was you know always happy to be out and chatting with people to someone that wanted to sort of be closed off and away from it a bit.
Yeah, it's interesting because 'cause I've known you in different periods. I knew you in that first period when you were that super happy-go-lucky and exactly how you just described, out and about. And then the period where you had a lot of success, I never saw you because I was living in America, racing in America. So, and then subsequently, I've seen you after when working for TNT Sport, where you seem back to your normal self. So I missed that period where you've obviously, well, you took a lot of heat, didn't you?
Yeah,
It
you
was
missed the right bit then, because it wasn't that I was still not friendly. Just people, it was a tough time. The media was everybody was against me, sort of thing. I didn't have this big outward character that everybody else was sort of looking for at the time, and and also because people truly didn't understand me, that I'm not there just to enjoy the racing. As we're explaining before, that it was sort of a road paved for me, um, and so the results were all important, not the enjoyment of it. And then you cop and flack for everything you do. I'm also very very self punishing, so it was kind of just a lose lose lose, and it was all very very heavy on myself. So it took me till my later years to realize that I could take the pressure off myself a little bit and go, look, you've done all the work, you've done everything you can, you got to be proud of what you've done. So not necessarily go out there and enjoy it, because I don't believe you should just be going out in a sport where you're paid as much as we are, expected to get results, and just oh, I'm just going to go and have fun. It's like, yeah, nah. If you're just going to go and have fun, then you're not putting in the work. And that's when we see inconsistencies, etc. So I was very, very um, harsh on myself, and so even when I won races, if I made mistakes or I wasn't happy with the way I rode, well, then yeah, I'm happy I won, but there's work to do. There was more to get out of myself, and so that's where I copped a lot of bad, let's say, bad press because of those kind of things, and then they sort of attack you even more because they didn't like the fact that you didn't celebrate these wins like they wanted you to. They expect you to, I suppose, treat every victory like almost a championship. And, um, it's not that I expected these wins, but I expected more of myself. And then, therefore, maybe I didn't celebrate them as much as, other people do.
And who was the worst for that?
For celebrating victories or for being harsh on
No,
myself?
no, sorry, Casey. Who was the worst? As in, where did you get the most flack? Was that just directly from the press? Are we talking fans at the track? Was it certain countries, Italy or the UK? I know you got a load of stick, which always the UK one wound me up more than anything because here you were, this young lad who came from Australia, based yourself in on the outskirts of Liverpool, lived in a caravan. I mean, you can't get more of a working class upbringing. You chose the UK as a base. You got lots of friends over there, and it was like a lot of the UK turned their back on you, and it really it pissed me off a lot, and I shouldn't use that word, but it just pissed me off because I used to always say you were one of the only people. Whenever you interviewed, you were honest. You knew exactly where you were. There were no, well, do you know what? I've had a fantastic day. Team's working really well. Everything's ace. Tires are great. You'd be, you'd just tell the truth, and because of that, you got so much flack. Like looking back now, would you do it different, or is it like, well, no, that's how I was, and that's how I am now? Would you change anything with regards to that aspect of it?
I certainly wouldn't change anything about how I did it. I think I've learned a lot over the years on how to articulate things a little bit better. Um, So I might be slightly more open to things in the way that, I can kind of, I suppose, shape certain questions a different way. I can explain things a little bit differently, and I challenged myself after the first few years of challenging for championships in MotoGP. I really learnt a lot on how to approach certain people, and I started to read each person individually, whether it be my competitors, whether it be the press, etc. Sort of knowing how to deal with each of them on an individual rather as just as a whole. Um, Helped me a lot with getting through those sort of moments. But I don't think I'm going to change who I am. That's for sure. I still tell it how it is. I'm maybe a little less harsh than I used to be in the way that I, like I said, articulate things a little differently. But no, I think that got me to where I was for that exact reason that I didn't, put any fluff on anything. It was just, this is how I see it, and they were all my opinions. It was my views, but I got punished for that. The media were very very tough on me, and as soon as the media are tough on you, whatever they freaking write, then the fans start to believe. So then
People
everyone just
believe.
starts hating on you. So that the British fans, I was really hurt by. I didn't know why they hated me so much. Because it was even before I got up against Valentino, it wasn't great. And then as soon as I got to challenge Valentino, then it just went downhill from there. But it was strange because there's been several other Aussie races that cut their teeth over in the UK, and if it wasn't for the UK, I wouldn't have got to where I was. And I've said that multiple times. Most of my best friends are from the UK during that time that I spent there. Um, I have such fond memories of the place. And then when I return, I get slaughtered. And I just couldn't really understand what I'd done to sort of warrant that. But, I think, like I said, the UK, they obviously want more of a show or showman. And I wanted to, I was always a sort of tell it how it was and whether it be good, bad. And, obviously a lot of people didn't like it.
Yeah, I, I was just thinking then of the Aussies. Like, look at Bailey said was really popular, but Troy told it as it was as well. He seemed pretty straight, and Troy Corser, people liked him. Mick Doohan maybe not so much in a weird sort of way because Mick was very very similar to you, I guess, and Wayne Gardner they seemed to like him. So yeah, it's a strange one. I guess the biggest issue was that you were telling it as it was, and then you've got the aura of Valentino, who played it absolutely perfect. Of course, Valentino is an incredible rider. Of course, goes without saying. But the way he worked the press was at the same level of his riding ability. Really, that's it. So he was in control, wasn't he?
He very much was. I mean, he had everybody sort of, in control, even press wise, because he was so important to every form of media. And if they ever wrote anything crap about him, he'd blacklist them. So as soon as he did that, then they couldn't afford that. They couldn't afford their paper to be blacklisted and not be able to have any kind of interview or any kind of dealings with Valentino anymore. So it was like, well, we've got to write bad press about someone. And since I became his,
Well, you're the
enemy
villain.
number one,
Yeah, you became the villain,
they
didn't you?
they
Really?
turned me into the villain. So um, it's often like that I see a lot of the people that get twisted into, let's say, the villain, or not always the villain. If it's kind of obvious, it's obvious. But people, just because they're maybe not so outwardly, kind, etc., often get bad press. And a lot of people are against Danny Pedrosa for the same reason. They didn't like him and his seriousness and all the rest of it. And we've seen the character of Danny come out later on as well. But Danny's, again, somebody who I stayed friends with through all of racing. Even through our championship battles and everything, I had nothing but respect for him. He showed nothing but respect for me, and we're good friends to this day. So, but they love to twist that around again, and Danny wasn't loved as much as he probably should have been or could have been, for the exact reason that he was maybe too serious and too focused on results rather than sort of acting the showman. And surprisingly, I didn't try and follow in Valentino's footsteps. I didn't try and, you know, take on the kind of role that he had. That's him and his character, and he was fantastic for the sport. And everything that he did around it was, like you said, he was almost perfect in the way that he did everything. Um, but I never tried to be that person. And yet I see a lot of people since me and since my racing try and be this same character, try and grab a hold of Valentino's, I suppose, fan base and do things like that. But then it's so put on, it's so acted, and yet they still love them for it. And I'm like, well, maybe I just sort of been that false, person basically out there, and played the fool, I suppose, and tried to get all this sort of attention. But it's never been me. I never wanted attention. All I wanted to do was go and race bikes, and I still wanted to entertain, but I didn't want to entertain because you wanted it. There's entertainment enough in what we do, and how close we race.
Yeah, you could actually say the same happened with Mark Marquez, going back to what happened in Malaysia all them years ago. From that moment on, obviously I'm at well, I have been at every MotoGP since, was it 2016?
I
And
think so.
Mark was booed for years and years and years. And it's I find it so entertaining now. I'll go on social media, and I know I shouldn't. I'll go on and I'll read some punter, and it'll be whatever MJ46, and it'll go, do you know what? I'm starting to think Mark Marquez is not a bad rider, or I'm starting to respect Mark Marquez. And I'm reading it thinking, yeah, the 8-time world champion who rode for Honda for all those years when definitely the bike wasn't at its best, who will do anything to win, I know he's done some dangerous things on the track over the years and he's been punished for it, but I tell you what, he's done some amazing things. And you get some punter going, I'm just about starting to respect him. And I'm like, but that is the ripple effect, the knock-on effect from 2016, from the hate from Valentino. He became definitely the enemy number one, and he's had to fight his way through it. It's exactly the same, isn't it?
Yep. No, it's the thing is though, Mark to a certain degree deserved his criticism. He tried to get in there, even though everybody blames Mark for the whole thing. People forget that Valentino started it. Mark's Mark. We've watched him do that all through his racing, and then Valentino started a war of words. They were all friends, and all the rest of it. Then Valentino started something, and then Mark retaliated because he didn't like it, and then of course everybody blows up about that, forgetting that Valentino went and poked the bear. If somebody rides aggressively and you know that they're capable of that, don't go and think you're above them to scare them out of it. You're not going to scare someone like Marc Marquez out of it. So all he's done during a championship year that he could have potentially won again is literally poke the worst rider on the grid to poke someone that can beat you, someone that's faster than you, and someone that can potentially take you out of a race or a championship. So I see it all the time in Supercross. I do not know why people create feuds with people that can literally go and clean them out and they don't care. And then your championship's done. And you go like, and try and, create blame for someone. And it's like, well, you just needed to keep your cool a little bit more in that situation. And it's hard, not all the time, but when you're getting old enough, you should know better. And, just to see all that kind of stuff after that many years, I think when Valentino was at his height before myself, Danny, Jorge got there, he used to be able to get in the minds of the riders around him. And I still think he believed that that happened. But all he did when we were there, the younger generation, I suppose, was strengthen us. We learned his tricks. We learned what he's capable of. And then we learned our way around that situation. So he, that was a mistake on his part, was losing control basically in the media, starting a feud with Mark, and then getting too involved in that race in Malaysia. And as much as Mark copped it, um, like I said, somewhat deservingly, Valentino sort of started to unravel that himself.
Yeah, I still can't believe that happened. That was like I say, it's a long time ago. In we when we're on TV with TNT Sport, we're not allowed to talk about it. It's like don't talk about 2016. I'll still get a lot of hate for bringing it up now, chatting to you. I'm only talking about the subject. It's not anyway. You know what it's like.
That's part of racing, and it's what they're talking about. Like I said, in Supercross again, and it needs to be governed to a certain degree, but at the same time, you want to see the emotion. So if everybody wants to sit there and bring it up and have their own opinions on it, that's great. It creates a little bit of spice. Um, but at the same time, being on the receiving end ain't always nice, and both of them have been on the receiving end. So it's
Mm.
been interesting to see how it all panned out.
With Supercross, and I know there'll be people listening that probably aren't into Supercross. I watch it sporadically throughout at the start of the year, and some of them takeouts are so bad though. For me, there should be more penalties. It's like, and I know penalties are boring, but bloody hell, there's going to be some rules, aren't there? You can't, especially with the layout of a Supercross track with their little 180 hairpin burn corners. When Bam Bam comes in at a bizarre angle and just rides through someone, you're like, you can't do that, surely. But like you said, a lot of it that they've created the drama between each other, and
Well, we're,
it's
we're
the
starting to see it now in MotoGP. People are just seeing a gap and taking it. It's like,
mm,
yes, but there's a rider there. You don't just go in and clean them out. If you go in there without a thought process, and you'll just see a small piece of tarmac and go, I want that. I don't care if someone's there. That's not okay. It goes down to that something that's, for me, incredibly immature way of thinking, which is to win at all costs. I hate that way of thinking. I mean, if you stop and actually think about what you're saying or what somebody is willing to do, it's the lowest of low, in my opinion. It's basically saying, I'm not good enough to win, so I will take whatever road I need to get it done. That's not winning. Anyone can go for a cheap shot and make it happen, especially if you can get away with it, like you seemingly can in Supercross. But to outsmart someone, outthink them and outride them is far better. You can still get in close. Occasional bumps happen. That's part of racing. But when you're going in there with intent to either take someone out or without even worry that you are going to hit someone just because you want that piece of track, for me, that's a thoughtless way of racing. It's not actually, being intelligent. Number one for championships. Number two, you can also bring yourself down, which we see a lot of those guys do in Supercross. They go in for a clean out move and take themselves down as well. So it's like, well done. Yeah, that was really worth it. But it's starting to happen in MotoGP, and unfortunately, a lot of the MotoGP ones are happening because of the bikes and the problems that we're seeing with all the aero and winglets. And the only way they can actually make an overtake is to risk it all on the brakes. So it's a bit tough for the MotoGP boys at the moment.
you'll have seen the rule changes. I know it's not till 2027. What are your thoughts on that? With a smaller capacity, a bit less fuel, less engines, slightly less aero. What are your thoughts?
I think it's Ducati basically trying to get those rules implemented again. I think that they know that they're going to have an advantage in that situation. If you think about it, if you've already got a lot of power, everyone's got a lot of power now, and yet they've still got an outstanding difference. The gap's going to be bigger when you go to a smaller engine. That gap to them is going to be even larger than it is now. Number two, they're talking about, heavier bikes, lighter, it's going to be easier. The braking points are going to shrink. When the braking point shrinks, there's less overtaking opportunities. The corner speed's going to pick up. They've already got aero. They've already got, overheating front brakes and tires and all this sort of stuff. Corner speed might pick up a little bit, which allows for less overtaking again. It's not like, 125s, 250s, Moto 3. It's not like that. There's still enough power to separate everyone, but everything's going to shrink now in terms of, overtaking opportunities, in my opinion. So they've done some of the right things with some of the stuff that's being removed, but the rest of it isn't even close to what it needs to be. I mean, I still feel like they're, Formula One cars with two wheels. We've got traction control and wheelie control and everything that Formula One doesn't have. Wheelie control isn't a safety issue, so I don't think that needs to be as as high a system, a higher functioning system as it is right now. I'd like to see, we've seen the ride height device and the start device that doesn't need to be there. I understand that bikes need to go forward technically to a certain degree, but there's a point that it has to stop. Motocross and supercross, traction control. Tell me why you're on the dirt and you need traction control. I understand for everybody that's the punters out riding and enjoying themselves in amateur racing, fair enough. But if you get to world championships, there should not be a such thing as traction control, wheelie control on those sort of bikes. So the FIM really needs to stand up and find a way to implement these rules and go, well, this is our standard, because Formula One has taken away so many things over the years. Adaptable suspension, the DAS system, they don't have traction control. There's all these things that everybody goes, oh, you need this stuff for it to move forward. Well, it doesn't necessarily have to. If you have, uh, a set of rules that everybody has to stick by for 10 years, you've got a hard job to try and make a difference over everybody else. But right now, seemingly, we have this never-ending, sheet that you can just do whatever the hell you want, and they'll just adapt the rules around you. And I'm like, well, this isn't, real. Not even for the engineers. You have to have parameters to stick within, so that everybody knows, where they stand, rather than, oh, that's a grey area, we can get around that.
Yeah, it's interesting what you're saying, and I've got to say I'm with you on that. Listen to Marquez after I think it was Mugello. It could have been the round before. I'm not too sure, but he said in the race, whilst you've got grip for the first 8 to 10 laps, it's not like playing a computer game, but the riders are braking at the same point. You've got the grip. You press the button, the ride out device goes down. You accelerate at the same point. You can't get close enough to make a pass. And he said he had to literally wait for the tyres to drop off so he can use his talent, some skill. And once
Yeah.
the tyres drop off after 10 laps, there's still, let's say, 15 laps to go, then it sort of starts for him. Then he can start to work and use his body, and obviously his skill levels, well, it's to the moon. And then he can work his way through. I remember in the race, I think it might have been Mugello, but he was stuck behind Frankie Morbidelli for something like 10 laps. And he's like, I can't do anything. Can't pass him. It wasn't Mugello. It was whatever the round before Mugello was. But and then he said once the grip level has gone down, then the race becomes fun. And I think that's sort of what you're talking about. It's a bit like that at the moment. You almost need Michelin to make worse tyres, which they're not going to do, and you can't blame them for doing that. It's their job to make the best tyres possible and to stay consistent. So it's definitely it's a grey area we've got coming, but it's a step in the right direction because they've got rid of the ride out devices. I think that's going to help, but it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Let's move on. Oh, go on.
No, I was just saying, like the championship, as we've said in the commentary, I want to see these riders' talent. I want to watch a slow mo instead of winglets bloody flexing. I actually want to see these guys sliding, controlling a wheelie, finding grip where there's no grip. That's what these things are about, and the challenge. And again, I'm often going to go back to Supercross and Motocross as well, because for me it's the same fundamental problems that we've got in the FIM at the moment with the rules. They're just allowing too much. I want to see the talent of these guys showcased a little bit more. And people complain all the time in motocross that the 450s are too powerful. They complain, about these MotoGP bikes. Oh, they're too powerful. They're too big. Blah blah blah. It's like, it's the point. You have to learn to control that power. It's not about, they're talking about all these electric bikes. Oh, they're so much easier to ride. Then count me out. I don't want something that's easy to ride. I want something that's hard to ride. When that grip level disappears, when it's harder to ride is when you need to start watching what people are capable of. And right now we're not watching a championship that is showing talent. We're watching a championship that the engineers are trying to take riders out of the equation. They want to get to the point where they can stick just about any rider on and they're going to be somewhat competitive. And essentially it ends up Formula One, where it depends on what car you're in rather than the actual talent of the driver or the rider. So it's it's very hard for me to sit back and watch because I've seen this happening, and like I said, it gets interesting towards the end of the race for Mark, and I would like to see um, you know, the best riders in the world riding the toughest bikes. Not because they're easy to ride. I don't want them easier to ride. If anything, harder. And you've got to try and make the best of it.
Yeah, what a great example. I was just also thinking, and I know he's copped some flack. Luca Marini's copped some flack. Okay, he signed for Honda. It was clear why he signed for Honda. If he stayed on the Ducati, he's never going to beat the other Ducatis on the Ducati because maybe he's not quite at that level. He's gone to Honda to hope that they find something. Obviously, I'm sure he gets a big payday. But Luca Marini went from finishing on the podiums on a Ducati to being absolutely dead last. Marco Bezzecchi has moved to the 23 Ducati. It doesn't quite work for him, and he's now genuinely battling around 10th place. He has been up there once or twice and crashed, but in general, he's battling for 10th, which underlines exactly what you're saying. Marco Bezzecchi finished third in the world last year. He won a few Grand Prix races. Arguably, you'd be going, this kid is super talented. He's definitely going all the way. And now I'm not too sure. So, yeah, it is.
Do you want to know where it all
It's
comes from, though?
Yeah, go on.
So I called Bezzecchi as one of the biggest talents coming through. From there was one moment I was watching him in Moto 2, and if you're not a guy that pushes the front end and trusts the front end, then you're not going to be competitive in MotoGP at the moment. Everything. This is why seriously, you could go and get someone from Moto 3, chuck them that's runs in all that corner speed, throw them straight in a MotoGP bike, and they're going to be competitive. You don't need to know how to ride and save tires and find grip like we used to. That's a thing of the past. You don't need to control wheel stands coming out of corners. That's a thing of the past. Bloody bike drops down, winglets everywhere. That stop all this wheeling. I mean, that was part of the skill, part of the talent of everyone was short shifting, finding the right moment. Watching, Danny Pedrosa was phenomenal at just using a little stab of the rear brake. Out of the last corner in Qatar, he pulled 2/10 on me to the finish line. Not even the end of the straight, just to the finish line. 1/10 to 2/10 every lap, just because he was so good at getting in that perfect torque zone and then stabbing the rear brake so that it dropped the front end and away he'd go. Now everyone can do the same bloody thing, and you don't even need the talent for it. You can come out, twist that throttle, and that thing's just going to go down the straight. There's no skill for me in that. All you need to do now is be a late breaker, somehow get that thing to find that last, few millimeters of tire and have the feel in the front end, which I never grew up with. I was a rear end rider, and that's something that Marco Bezzecchi, I feel, is very good at it. He was very good at picking that bike up, finding the center of the tire, driving out well. And so basically this style of racing that's going more and more towards that way is nowhere near where it needs to be for him. And for me, as soon as you take away grip from the rear end, you will see that guy go back to the front. You will see Marquez showing his class a lot more than what the others would. And that's why I'd like to get rid of some of that rear grip and all those winglets and that ride height device. Like, let them work for it. It's
Yeah,
a lot more of a skill than people realize.
yeah. What I wanted to ask you, you moved into MotoGP like relatively quickly. How old was you? What year? What was you like? 21?
I was
About
18, 19 or something.
oh, 19. But you were fast straight away. It was like it appeared that there was almost like Pedro Acosta, a similar sort of straight away. You're there. Pole position. Were you pole position at your second GP?
I can't remember, it was second or third, yeah, something like that.
Yeah, Qatar, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's like that level of speed. What? Why? How? I mean, that is not normal.
Well, I think it's because that goes back to the dirt track thing, and that's why it's become so popular these days. Mark's really made it popular again. But even when I was doing what I did, nobody seemed to cotton on to the fact that I grew up dirt tracking. So that's where I got my feel and things like that from. So going into 125s and 250s, you had to trust the front so much, and I was never comfortable trusting the front. I came from dirt track where I knew what the rear was doing. So that's where I found all my grip, and that's where I found all my time. I would turn the bike from the rear. I never really liked going in and trying to trust the front. So it took me time, 125s and 250s to get there for that. And then once I got to MotoGP, I was like, oh, this is so much easier. I don't need to worry about the front end so much. I can get in and be on the side of the tire for the smallest amount of time possible, get that rear tire up, square it up, and drive it out. And because of the throttle control, it not only helps you with traction, it helps you with wheelie control as well. So basically, you're short shifting and all these sort of different things, floating that front end at the right amount where you're getting as much traction and drive forward as you can. There's a point that you can float the front end that it's just perfect. You can almost go full throttle when you get it to that spot. And it allows you to be so much faster than everybody else. But getting to that point is tricky. So I think the whole dirt track really made MotoGP that much easier for me. So by the time I got there, where everybody's scared of the rear because the European riders aren't used to the thing moving around so much and having so much wheel spin. And even if they're not scared, trying to find traction, where on a 125 and 250, you can kind of almost crack it on and not worry about it. These bikes, they're spinning up till fifth gear. So it's there's a lot more to finding grip, and it was a lot easier then for me to you know ride these bikes compared to the smaller categories.
And can you remember your first ride on one?
Almost can. I could picture bits and pieces of it. That was a beautiful bike, that V5.
Mm,
And I got off the Aprilia, the day before or 2 days
the
before, whatever it
250.
was, 250, which was difficult to ride. Very, very difficult to ride. Probably the most, besides the '07 Ducati, it was the most difficult bike I've ever ridden. Um, Incredibly fast when it was in its window. When it was out of its window, it wanted to eat you alive. It was so stiff and it would just twitch and move. But not
My God,
only that,
I saw you have some crashes on that 250.
oh,
I still have nightmares about them, and that was from watching them. But literally, because the bike would go.
yeah, that was my second race. I can't remember now on a
Yeah, the one
250.
in.
That was in '02.
I'm
So
trying to
I'd only
think
been
that
road
crash.
racing for 2 years when I was in World Championship 250s, one step from the Premier class after only being on the road for 2 years. That was it definitely
In
wasn't
at
the
the
right
deep
class
end.
for me to go to, but it was our only option at the time. So it was we can look at it as a mistake, but at the same time it was our way in, and it was awesome. But that Aprilia 250, the second one, so in 2005 when I went back to it, was so incredibly hard to change direction. So when I got on the Honda, I was expecting this bike was going to be so much more difficult to change direction and all this sort of stuff. And the inertia obviously is so much less with that bike. It was way easier to change direction. So you're going off the end of the back straight in Valencia, you go left through that chicane right. That was the best example. The Aprilia trying to get that thing back over to the right was so bloody heavy and twitchy, and it was just nerve wracking going into that corner. Whereas the Honda, when I could slide it through that left and it just flick up, go boom over to the right, pick it up and drive and break in a straight line, I was just like, why is this so much easier than a 250? And it was just the way, I suppose, the motor and the inertia and the way that they've got everything running. Whereas um, the way the 250 went, I think compared to the Honda as well, the Aprilia was a lot more difficult to ride. But when it was on, it was incredibly good.
I love how you mentioned the '07 Ducati. I mean, what a year! I mean, talk about what dreams are made of. You won 10 of the 18 races, and everyone thought the bike was so easy to ride. Not many people got the chance to ride that bike. I did, because I was your tyre tester. I did loads and loads of tyre testing that year. I was out. I was unemployed. I'd been racing in the AMA Superbike Championship for 2 years,
Yep.
'05 and '06. And at the start of '07, Ducati pulled the plug on the factory effort there in America, and I was left without a job. And I can't remember who got in touch with me, but they said, "Would you be interested in riding and doing some tyre testing for Bridgestone on the MotoGP bike?" Can you imagine? I'm like, I'm up for that. Yeah, definitely. And the funny thing is, I, like everybody else, I'd watched a few races, I'd watched you win, and I thought, that looks pretty easy, that bike. And I still, to this day, it was the most physical bike I rode. I rode it a lot at Mugello, which is lots of change of direction.
Yep.
And the last fast chicane, is it Biondetti 1 and 2? Is the
Yep.
fast that fast S through there? Bear in mind, I also had the advantage of being able to look at your data and how you could get the bike through there. It was like you'd gain half a second through that chicane on me. I could not get. Well, I couldn't get. And I'm not embarrassed to admit this. I couldn't get within 2 seconds of what you could do around Mugello. And I tell you what, I had some soft tires trying a few times as well. It was that Ducati was just an animal.
It's hard to ride,
What
wasn't it?
like so hard to ride, but obviously at times you made it look so easy and you destroyed the opposition. And everyone thought clearly the best bike on the grid by miles. Loads of electronics. That's all. By the way, that's all Casey Stoner ever does. He does this, and the electronics are sorted all out, which was I know was the exact opposite.
If you let those
And yeah,
electronics sorted out, they would sort you out, I think.
bloody hell, yeah, you'd end up in hospital. But yeah, what a privilege it was for me to ride that bike on numerous. I don't know, probably did about 10 tests, but that was some bike, wasn't it?
It was. It wasn't, except for sort of, fourth, fifth gear, it wasn't really good at anything. It didn't go around the corners. It was pretty good under brakes. It was pretty stable under brakes. That's without a doubt. It didn't have sort of strong braking power, but it was stable, which was probably the first bike I'd ever ridden with such stability on the braking. So that was a really nice part to have about it. Fourth, fifth, and sixth gear, of course, it just came into its own. But the first three gears, we'd just get absolutely eaten alive. So any tracks that you come to where you have to just accelerate and really pump out of the corners, we were gone. We really, really struggled that. But we tried to just minimize the weaknesses and maximize its strength. And everybody saw what its strengths were. Its top speed. And with its top speed, we had some stable braking. So we basically just tried to sit at the front of races as much as we could and make everybody else work for it. Because if we didn't qualify well or we weren't at the front of the race early, it was very hard to chase people down. Because if they could get a few clean laps going, it was very, very hard to make the most of that bike. So basically, we sort of tried to maximize that strength and just try to deal with whatever we could through the corners because it really was very, very hard to get the thing to turn. Anything with stability like that, it was running too low. It wasn't enough pitch in it, which I finally got them to sort of make some changes in the later years when we didn't have that speed advantage, but we got the bike to turn a lot better. But in that year, it was certainly a challenge. But it did the job for me. My team did an amazing job. They weren't they were the same as myself. I felt so privileged to have the opportunity to race a factory team. I'd just come from realistically, I'd pretty much signed for Yamaha, and then 2 years in a row they pulled the contract out from under our feet at the 11th hour kind of thing, and basically didn't have a ride for the next year. But fortunately, we signed with Ducati. I had motivation to basically show Yamaha that they made a mistake by taking that away. So I thought if I can get a couple of podiums and maybe one win this year, that's my goal. And then we did that in the first three
Just
races, four
just the
races. I
10
think we won
wins.
three of them. So we went, oh, okay. So I've achieved my goals. All right, let's keep moving forward. And Christian Gabarini. So let's not forget, I was brought in as a replacement for 1 year. So Loris Capirossi was Ducati's golden child. Um, Marco Melandri had already been signed for 2008. I was a fill-in guy. You know, I was paid very good for me, but I was paid very, very little in comparison. Um, and Christian Gabarini was brought in to be my engineer. He'd never been a chief engineer either. So we were both just sort of like, oh, they're both cheap. Yeah, let's just throw them in for this year, and then we'll bring Marco and that in alongside Loris for the year after. And then both of us had the same attitude. We appreciated the position we were in. We worked really fantastically together. And then we never looked at everybody else's bike and went, oh, the grass is greener over there. We went, this is what we've got to work with. So we sort of never got to that stage, I think, that a lot of other riders on the Ducati were comparing to the Honda and to the Yamaha and Suzuki and all that sort of thing. And it was like, no, this is what we've got, and it's got its strengths. So we just need to try and make the best of it. And without my crew that I had, my engineer, it would have been a lot tougher year. But I think that's why we stayed together through the rest of my MotoGP career, because they were just fantastic at that never say never and never give up, and just kept trying to find solutions no matter what.
Clearly, you did a very good job. So you retire at 27, and I'm sure you've been asked this loads of times, but I've never asked you this. Was it like you thought? Was it the yes, I am so happy, this is great, or I don't know what goes through your head?
So most people that retire, let's say early, are either forced into retirement. They feel like they've left a lot on the table, um, and so their careers sort of in their mind was never complete. So and a lot of these people still had, racing was their life. Racing wasn't my life. I still had a life out of racing that I wanted to have. There's so many other things that I really enjoyed doing, and other things that I wanted to sort of, I suppose, achieve on a personal level outside of racing. But while you're racing, that's the only thing you can do. You can't risk it doing anything else. You can't risk injury. You can't risk all sorts of other stuff. When you did have time to maybe go and do something, you're probably bloody half injured or too exhausted. You just needed time off. So your whole world did pretty much revolve around racing. When I wasn't that guy that needed that. People when they get to the track, their whole world is about racing and the bike and what they can do. Whereas I would be working in the garage with my technicians, and then as soon as I basically left the garage and went back to the motorhome, I barely thought about what was going on the track. I'd get on and do some gaming and things like that, get my mind away from it, almost as far away from it as possible. People would come in and try and engage on chatting about what was going on, and I wasn't interested. Occasionally I was, when I sort of wanted to know what somebody else was doing, or if there was some things that I could improve, and I was watching the session in my motorhome, rewatching to see what I could improve on. But I would basically do it in small slots of, and it was the same thing when I was on track. Quality, not quantity. So rather than surround myself entirely for a whole weekend or a whole year, whatever it is, my whole life about racing, I would be like, no, this slot is about racing. This is when I need to concentrate. You can only give 100% for a short amount of time. Nobody can give 100% the whole time. You drive yourself crazy. You could not keep things in perspective. You couldn't understand each change that you make. It's the same thing when you see the pros play golf. They cannot give all their full concentration for all 4 rounds and all 18 holes and every shot on it. They pull their concentration for the most important shots, and then they basically relax a bit on the shots that they know they've got a bit of leeway. And it's the same thing. It's I didn't need to do as many laps as other people. I would put a lot more effort and put a lot more concentration into that shorter stints and get more out of it. So everybody sort of criticized me for it for years. And then after I retired, people started emulating me, trying to get more out of themselves faster when they got on track, rather than wasting time getting up to speed. So it's there's definitely lots of ways to do it, but for me, it was separating myself from it, and making sure that I gave my full attention to it for shorter periods of time. And I think it worked quite well.
Not bad, not bad. Last question then, really, is what's the next chapter? You've been retired for over 10 years. You seem to have creeping back a little bit into the sport. Obviously, you've done stuff with us, TNT, which we've all really enjoyed, and you've come across really well. What's next for Casey Stoner? I feel like you're at the halfway point in your life at your age. hopefully you live for longer. But you know, you've got a lot of years ahead of you. What are you thinking?
To be honest, still trying to get over chronic fatigue syndrome. It's been certainly better over the last couple of years, but I still have had a lot of ups and downs. I've had long periods where I've still been kind of sat on the couch, and um, I would really like to finish that, and that's why I did separate myself pretty much entirely from the world of MotoGP and sport in general. It was actually too hard for me to even watch or do anything because I wasn't even able to get out there and do anything. So a lot of depression would sort of kick in over that. So I really sort of separated myself a little bit from the industry and from other aspects like that. And now I'm, slowly getting more interested in it again. Now that I have a little bit more energy to give, um, so I can sort of see what's going on a little bit more. I'd still really like to work with some, not necessarily going through the whole selection process of riders coming up through, but being able to select a couple of riders that I feel like I have a lot to give. I have a very different perspective than a lot of other people, and I feel like there's certain things in MotoGP that I did better than others. There's certain things that I still know I didn't do well enough, but there's certain things that I've learned a lot, and a lot that I've never given out to anybody. So I wouldn't mind having the opportunity to work with the right people, um, to be able to sort of, I suppose, utilize all those years of experience and put it in towards someone else deservingly of it, and you know, try and help them achieve maybe some of those goals.
Well, Casey, I've taken up so much of your time. I'm looking at my timer now. We've talked for nearly 2 hours. Thank you so much. I know it's the evening there in Australia. It's the morning here on the Isle of Man. Um, Thanks. I knew you'd be pretty candid. I knew you'd be honest and open, which you have been. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much. It's always a good catching up with you, to be honest. And yeah, it was too many years in between them.
Hopefully, we'll get to. I don't know if you plan on coming to Phillip Island again. I'll have to if you fancy it. I know TNT Sport will be all over having you as their number two pundit behind the old guy.
No, yeah, I'm there for a little bit of information, especially around Phillip Island. I know why you want me there, but um, but no, it's a lot of fun working with you guys, to be honest, and I enjoyed it far more than I expected to. You're a great team of people, and you all have really great views and do a fantastic job, to be honest, and it's an absolute pleasure to be alongside you all.
Top man, top man. Well, that's it. That's the first Ducati Diaries. If you've enjoyed it, please tell your friends and listen out. There's going to be plenty more coming soon. So thanks for listening, and we'll be back soon.